Mary Virginia Maxwell, or MV, and I'm a licensed a clinician here in Washington State, and I work in special education at ESD 105 and with students services supporting children in the schools. And I also work at Yakima Pediatrics and Integrated Behavioral Health at the teen clinic, and was part of the Davis school-based clinic that we started here a couple years ago. I wanted everyone to just take a moment. If you could think of 2 words to describe how you feel these days, what 2 words would those be? Go ahead and yell it. Okay. All right, yes. Been hearing a lot of that from our educators and our doctors. I have 1 foot in the medical world and 1 foot in the schools. Just definitely hearing overworked, tired, exhausted. This morning I heard weary, that my ancestors were weary, someone mentioned to me. So it's going deep. So I'm hoping that some of this information could help us be proactive and promotional in how we look at specifically behaviors or mental health issues that children might have that would result in challenging behaviors that you are dealing with. Of course, we have our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we're coming to you from the traditional lands of the first people of our valley, the 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the Yakima tribe. Here's me with one of my little people. I have 12 little grandbabies now growing up here in the valley, so I am very invested in keeping us all safe and happy and learning. So, what today I'd like to do is make sure that you are familiar with some of the neuroscience of the impact of trauma and stress on a developing brain, right? So even though you might not be working with a child under the age of 12, you know that that impact is there and how that's shaped the child's architecture of their brain and their worldview, how they express themselves. I'd like you to remember and recognize adverse childhood experiences when you bump up into them, which you do, I'm sure. And also, we need to kind of explore some tools, right? We need to know what to do so that we can build hope and resilience. And we know that healing from trauma is possible, but it's absolutely healing within community, healing within relationships. So, we're off. Courageous conversation norms, please be interactive. After all these years of Zoom presentations, I'm so happy to be in with live people. Please raise your hand, blurt out, stand up, whatever you need. But I like us all to stay engaged and be curious. If something is like, I don't know about that, let me know. Speak your truth, right? You're coming with your own unique and very valuable lens, your experiences, your worldview to this information. You might experience some discomfort. We might be talking about some things that really do, bump up against closely held values and beliefs. Recognize that. And expect and accept non-closure, meaning I don't have any pretty little bows, or here's the 1 flyer and the 3 things to do to make sure a child doesn't throw bricks at you. I don't have that available. But we do know that we can work together and we can build tools, right? We can be preventative, we can be supportive in all places, with all people, especially our school staff. I do want to recognize the weariness of the school staff. So you're probably no surprises here, but of course we have had a huge increase in mental health challenges, right? Would all of you agree this past year was something just really different than we've ever seen, a completely different flavor than we've ever seen in schools? So we know, this goes all the way back to 2006, but we know some of those health risk behaviors, and of course that is defined as perhaps substance use, right? Multiple partners, engaging in behaviors that would not increase your chance of success as a student or a person, right? In relationships and make life worthwhile. So we see it increasing, right? I really wanted to pay attention. Of course, I'm from Yakima, so these are going to be related to our Yakima County. But the Yakima Department of Health, youth who reported feeling sad and hopeless are more likely than others to engage in these high-risk behaviors, drinking alcoholic beverages, abusing prescription painkillers, and carrying weapons. That's usually not a lens I was using, right, as far as assessing or how are you doing, how are you functioning today. That's something that's definitely been much more on my radar. And they are also more likely to report considering suicide, being abused by an adult, and having a low quality of life. And I think about that term, a low quality of life. What does that mean to somebody? Yeah, and I will say, I have heard this across the valley. So I go all the way to Easton, all the way down to Goldendale. We serve many districts. I have, and it's almost typically an 8th grader And they say something that sounds very much like this. What does it matter, miss? We've only got 8 years left. I'm like, what do you mean, 8 years left? What is this? What they're referencing, I have come to understand, is that they believe from the information they're getting, whether it's TikTok or the internet or whatever, is in 8 years, the world will be so on fire, there's nothing left worth fighting for. And they're coming in with this belief, right? This understanding of, yeah, I want to feel better. Thank you for helping me. It's okay. Never mind. Also, it's all going to be over in 8 years. Is anyone else hearing this? Yeah, I'm hearing this across the board, middle schools, high schools. Also, I'd just like to point out in Yakima, we've definitely seen an increase in passive suicidal ideation, meaning there are kids that aren't having a plan, they're not attempting suicide, but they've given up hope. And we're seeing a huge increase in that in our elementary school age kids. And if you look at the data for ER visits, that has increased substantially this year. As well, just as I also work with our little people in early learning, a 30% increase in early intervention referrals just in the first 6 months of this year. And we certainly don't have the capacity to meet that, but where people are reaching out, we know people are suffering. So that's not very encouraging information, but because we're all here with our wonderful skills and experience and wisdom, we can make a difference. So does this seem familiar to you? Is this what you're seeing? More difficult behaviors in younger ages, sort of more entrenched, and then this sort of general air of helplessness or hopelessness, right? Yeah.
How much of that would you attribute to the fact that they were out of school for like a whole year?
Yeah. I would attribute actually a lot of that, and that is what I'm also hearing from school staff. So at first I thought, hang on, I see you too, and I'll get to that.
Just a reminder,
yes.
If you have a question, if you would put your hand up and wait for a microphone. It may take us a second to run out there. We just need to get it on mic so our online participants can hear too.
Perfect. Okay, his question is about whether COVID influences being out of school. And definitely we saw people, young people and not so young people, kind of forgetting some of the social norms, right? You know, having a hard time relating to others. Small children that hadn't been exposed to actual school, so coming into kinder or first grade as their first time in person, not realizing that you don't just get up and leave the classroom anytime you want a snack. You know, we had roamers and people that were hungry and just kind of up and moving around, not quite recognizing that there was an authority person in the room, the teacher, you know, that they would ask questions to. So yeah, I think and whatever was going on in that family situation would add to that stress, right? Yeah, sort of everyone was sort of untethered. Yes, and then this gentleman.
Is it happening more, or is it just more in our face? Are we seeing it because now we can see it, as opposed to in the past where, you know, we don't have the platforms we have now,
right,
to make it more known and visible?
That is a great question. I do not have a firm answer on that. I think we're still waiting. You know, we'll be seeing some more data coming in. Definitely we are more sensitive, right, with our screeners and the tools we use to identify. And it might be both. I almost want to say both, right? I think there's more of it as we look at sort of everything that's been going on in the world in the last 2 years. And then I think we are becoming more skilled and more attuned to recognizing it when it shows up in our face, as you say. Yeah, great perspective to have. So do we all agree with this, though, that building relationships really is a precondition to learning, right? And I think possibly we forgot that in our rush to get back into the schools. We were so happy to be back, and we were so intent on making sure that learning gap was not going to linger, right? That I think we forgot to settle down first, right? And to see if students did have any practice, you know, playing school. That is certainly something that I've experienced. Recently I was in a high school where they're telling me that the students don't make eye contact. They don't say hello back. Just simple sort of, you know, what was usually typically normed in a high school. That they were seeing sophomores and freshmen playing games that were more like developmentally appropriate to 11 and 12-year-old, like playing tag out in the grass. They were just curious about, is that, you know, also related to what we might have missed during COVID, right? Those opportunities for engagement and socializing. So something to think about. Of course, all of us perform better in the context of a safe, right, and positive relationship. We know that. You just had a nice long talk on that, but that is so important in all our relationships. And I've come to understand it's got to be a felt sense of safety. So that is that idea that when you are with that particular person, you feel safe within your body, right? So if you would just pause for a moment, and can you think of one person in your life that you have, at least one person, that you have that sense of felt safety? You know, where your system is regulated, you don't have to pretend anything. You know, you can say something and it's gonna land however it lands and be received with unconditional love and acceptance. And then also maybe think about someone that you don't have that felt sense of safety, that internal sense of like, this person gets me. It's all gonna be good, no matter what. And just think about what that brings up. Because of course, we get all our information from our senses, right? And that is combined with the information we received as a child through our world experiences. So we always think about this, right? We think about the memory of our experiences is stored in our body. So even before you could speak or walk, or before you have any actual cognitive memories, you are going to have those experiences stored in your body. Here's a little Jeopardy question for you. What is the only muscle an infant from the moment it is born has voluntary control over? Only muscle. The minute it's born. There it is, laying on your belly. If you're there. What do you think? God, you won't get in trouble. You can go take a risk, you know.
I'd say the smile.
Smile, close, good, good. You're in the right vicinity. Eyes, yes, right. That is the only muscle they can control. Did he have the answer?
I was going to say crying.
Crying, close, close. Yeah, that is certainly a cue. They're trying to communicate with you. But the one muscle they can control is their eyes. Good answer. Yay for people being brave. Absolutely. Eyes. So why would that be so important? Why would they need to control their eyes? Out of all the other things you would like them to control as a small infant, why the eyes?
Just so you kind of take the world in around them and see what to expect.
Yes, yeah, actually. And their survival, their very survival, is based on making a relationship with you, right? That you connect, that we see each other, right? That you are going to care for me. So that is their most powerful tool, along with the other tools that they have. But yes, so I just want you to think about this idea that if you were born into a family, perhaps during COVID, that is experiencing some stress, some heightened stress through no fault of their own, but through all the systems that are going on, you can imagine that maybe the stress caregiver is not as responsive or as attuned to you, right? And so maybe you cry and no one comes and says, what do you need, little baby? Or maybe your mom is super depressed and doesn't make a lot of eye contact. They take good physical care of you, but you're not getting that robust back and forth. I see you, you're so precious to me. Those all help shape our brain architecture, right? And help our brain understand what they think the world is going to be. Because does your brain know what the world is going to be when you're 2 months old? All it knows is 2 months of world, right? But it is going to make some assumptions because its job is to keep you alive. It is a meaning-making machine. So of course at birth, you only have a few synapses connected, right? Because it's waiting to see what the environment is that you land in. And then we know we have robust neural connections happening, everything's firing. And of course, if you don't get that responsive, attuned interaction relationship early, they are not going to connect. Other ones will connect, right? Because what fires together is going to wire together. So if you have an unpredictable caregiver, sometimes I cry and the person shows up, sometimes I cry and cry and cry and no one comes. What happens if a baby just cries and cries and cries and no one shows up? What do you think the message is to baby? Yeah, well, they can't just keep crying and crying because their brain will say, look, you're using all your energy, all your calories, and we don't know when your next meal is coming. You should shut it down, right? So they become very quiet. And then what happens, possibly now that baby is a very quiet, unresponsive baby, and mom's like, well, it doesn't even do anything, doesn't even cry out for me, so I just go along my way. You can see how it just becomes interrelated, right? You respond to the cues, baby responds to you. Of course, in elementary age, we see this. We know we've got all those neurons hooking up. Any of you work in the elementary schools in here? No? All you guys are higher up? What? Okay, there you are. Okay. Yeah, so you know the kids are learning daily, right? They're curious, they're eager, they're creative, they're learning, and things are hooking up. And then, of course, puberty happens, and it keeps happening at younger and younger ages. I think the onset of puberty now is 11 years, 6 months for females, which is much different than it used to be, right? That's much earlier. So we have to think of that kind of developmentally too when we're thinking about our 5th graders and 6th graders. But what looks like is happening there at puberty? What's going on? Are things less connected?
Crazy
Yes, exactly. That's generally what people think. They're like, oh, that explains it. Nothing's connected anymore, you know. That's why they're, you know, jumping off. I had my son once decide to jump off the roof on a snowboard, even though there was only 4 inches of snow, and he broke both arms, and he was puzzled by the response. I was like, what were you thinking? But anyway, that happens. So yes. So what's happened then is there's some pruning. If things are not connected, you do get to a certain age where you're like, the brain doesn't need all of these, just keep connecting. We're going to start pruning what isn't used. And that, again, can help decide how you're going to move forward in life, how you're going to socially function, right? You always have neuroplasticity. So you can always build more. You can always adapt. But this is just how we roll along through our ages. There are consequences, right? Biological consequences and outcomes that we can see, right? That doctors and specialists can see through imaging. The brain there on the left is a typically developing brain from a robust relationship, right? With their family, with their caregivers. And there's one with extreme neglect. You can just see it's much smaller, right? It hasn't had those opportunities to have all those neurons connecting and wiring. The important thing to remember, this does not mean this person is brain damaged. Do not think of it that way. Just think it didn't have those early opportunities for growth, right, and development. I think one of the parts that is most impacted through extreme neglect is your hippocampus, right, which you need. That's your seat of your emotional memories and how you kind of work through emotional situations. And that can be reduced up to 30% just in their mass, right, just in the size of it. So it's important to remember all this. And of course, if you're working with older children, you're like, well, lady, I don't have any information about what they were like when they were little guys. So I added into my informal talks and my more formal talks with students I'm working with, I always say, tell me how your family would describe you. How would your mom describe you if she was sitting right here? Like, what were you like as a baby? And they give me the best answers always. It is a great place to start and get some more information. That, you know, just asking a lot of pokey questions you might not get. So really what we're talking about here is from conception on, because you got to think of, you know, prenatally, what was the mama exposed to during COVID, right? During these difficult times, what sort of environment were they in? What kind of stress was she under? What is happening to that baby in there swimming around and all the hormones, cortisol hormones from the mama? And then you want to think, well, okay, the childhood experience, if you end up in a world that you perceive is dangerous because of unpredictable, unresponsive caregivers through no fault of their own, but because that is the world you landed in, you are going to be permanently stuck kind of in fight, flight, freeze, right? You're going to be activated. All those stress response systems are going to be prematurely activated and on high alert all the time, because that is what has kept you alive. Is your brain is a meaning-making machine. It is trying to make sure you are alive every day. So it wants to keep you aware and alert and primed for threat. So of course what we know about these youngsters is they're going to do fine. They would survive the worst conditions, right? I have had so many kids this year and last year reference COVID as the zombie apocalypse. I'm sure they've seen all the movies, whatever, even my littles, right? And they just talk about what it feels like to them. That's what it feels like. Yes?
Do they have short lifespans?
Shorter lifespans if they have... Yeah, good point. They absolutely do. The more recent studies say it can be, if you have had adversity like this in childhood, constant and chronic, it can be up to 20 years less life expectancy. You are at risk for that. You know, there are ways to mitigate all of this, right? But yes. So you can imagine, right? Sort of what they call the allostatic load, the chronic wear and tear on your body of that level of stress. It is not good. So of course you have then also the children that land in a benevolent world, right? And they have people around them that keep them safe, and they have that felt sense of safety, and they have responsive, attuned adults. And they come to school and they're like, hey, people like me, I like people, I know how this works, right? I get it. You know, I act this way, you act that way, everything is good. And they show up and they wait in line, they know they're gonna get their turn. They're just very much primed for our social expectations of school. However, they might not survive the zombie apocalypse, right? They might wait in line and go, well, maybe someone will come and help me, or maybe that's a nice zombie, I will go up and find out. Versus our other children will not do that. They will know, they will see the threat, they will know what they're looking at. Oh, and we're gonna play this movie, right? We can do it. Okay, so this is just this is a very famous infant study, which is still going on, by the way, that is just this, it's called the still phase, and it's just a short time where they ask the mother not to respond to the baby. And we're gonna see how the baby interprets this. let's see. I don't think we have sound yet.
Good up here.
Anyone take Psych 101 and saw this movie? Many, many times? Yes. It's hard to watch, right?
To the emotions and the babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So what do you think? Was that hard for you guys to watch? Don't you want to just reach out and make sure someone picks up that baby right away? So this is the sort of situations I think that would shape your worldview, right? If there is no predictable person, no reliable person that is going to respond to you, right? That you can trust to be there, then that's how you're going to view the world. And I think the important thing here that he mentions is that idea of repair. So all of us have probably thought of times when we did not handle something skillfully, we're not able to attune or respond to the child or our partner, but we're able to come back and do that repair, right? So I think I've seen many children, possibly because of COVID, it's been also increased, where they just didn't have that attuned person that was also available for the repair work, right? And so that is something they're going to continue on. We were going to just keep moving along because we don't have 2 minutes for that. But did any of you feel like kind of like, oh, go pick that baby, like that urge, that kind of like cringy, like just get the baby up. Okay, let's do it. So that's definitely where I live with that one. And then because we're primed for that, human beings are wired for connection. And babies with all their unique talents and skills are wired to get us to care for them. But we know things can interrupt that, right? So that is our interpersonal neurobiology. We're going to connect with each other. We are always striving for relationship and understanding someone, and you understand me, and I understand you. But fear, that fear of not being attended to, changes the way we think, right? And that is what I think I am seeing due to COVID, due to what was happening before COVID, due to what they think is going to be happening in 8 years when the entire planet is on fire. That is what I am seeing. That is changing the way we're thinking. Certainly with the youth that I'm working with, definitely feeling helpless, hopeless, or angry, and just sort of dysregulated all the time. So any of you ever seen this slide before? Yes, right. This was a study they did with foster children that had been removed from their caregivers, and they asked them just to look at the picture and the faces, and moving, if we were to move from the right as number 1 all the way up to 11 on the left for you, where they saw that face look dangerous, where they perceived threat from that person, just a random person. Say that person was standing next to you at McDonald's. Where would most of you guys go? Where would you look at that person and go like, okay, I guess he's kind of ticked off? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For me, when the eyebrows come in a little bit and the mouth is open, I'm like, okay, that guy might be going through something.
I know they all look kind of crazy.
There's a lot of faces to count. One would be just mild-mannered dude. Over there, clearly an angry person shouting, right? Well, for these young people, they all went with number 2. Face number 2. They perceived, their brain told them, that's a dangerous, threatening person. And for the female, it's actually 1. To me, the woman looks like she just really needs a nap, right? That is a very tired, exhausted person, but they perceive that person as threatening. So just to recognize, if your brain has been uniquely wired to perceive threat everywhere, and fear has changed the way you think, then where we might think we just have our stern voice on, or we just have our regular face on, it might be perceived in different ways, right? That does not mean we just walk around smiling all the time. It just means we recognize it. Yeah?
Could that be influenced by social
Could you wait for the microphone?
Oh, wait for the microphone. Okay. She's going to.
Could that be influenced by social economic factors?
Absolutely, absolutely, right? Yeah, I think it actually could be influenced by a lot of factors. I was in a social emotional learning group with a bunch of 5th graders the other day, and they showed a very simple picture of like 2 kids playing football, right? And this one kid wanted to join, and he was smiling, and so they were just going over, how do you know someone's going to be friendly, right? And everyone was like, they're smiling, and the teacher's like, that's right, smiling says you're friendly, smiling says that you want them to join. Well, the 5th grader sitting next to me muttered under his breath, but I was sitting right next to him, he said, yeah, unless they're doing that smile right before they beat you. So even this idea that we can give a universally recognized smiley, friendly face can be interpreted differently, right? Due to whatever socioeconomic factors have influenced you, right? So yeah. So absolutely how we get wired impacts our worldview, right? And it's just our brain wiring. It is not good or bad, it just is. You know how we always tell people, feelings are just feelings, they're not good or bad, they just are. It's the same thing, right? But you definitely want to recognize that if you have a child that has lived through, any sort of abuse, they are going to feel in danger, threatened, less likely to trust. They might either try and mask it really well in the classroom. They might be a really high-performing student that is super okay, but also sort of emotionally shut down, right? Or they might be super emotional and, dysregulated. You don't know. But we do have to get curious and think if we see behaviors or even a behavior change, right? Where you're like, this doesn't make sense. What's happening here? What's going on? Again, during COVID, I just think of some of the isolation some of our children had. That they weren't able to just experience some of those socializing, events from going to church, hanging out at the park, just some of the informal ones. And then also missing out on that in-person learning time, right? It's through no fault of anybody, it's just what it was. But I think there was a real sense of isolation for a lot of our families. Yeah, did you?
Yeah. So could a child who has experienced this type of, the wiring where they're kind of disconnected, cope with that better than a child who grew up not wired that way and then experiences it later and then has this, intense response to that situation versus the child who grew up differently?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. That's been coming up a lot because people are saying, well, what about kids that they were like age 12 and then they started experiencing adversity, right? So it definitely depends, right, on what sort of protective factors and buffers you have and where you are developmentally, right? And I would want to add, it also depends on temperament, right? If any of you have children of your own or know a child, you might realize that all of them have their own unique temperament, right? Their default setting. So again, you just have to kind of get curious. I wish there was a real formal way of looking at it, but I will say adversity that comes later in life is usually something that we can more quickly heal through and build resilience to, right? First of all, you can articulate it better, perhaps. You might have had those protective and buffering factors in your life. Any of you seen that movie Inside Out, right? That talks about all the feelings. Right, I love that movie, except I'm always like, would that child fall apart that quickly due to that one event after all those years of rich, robust support? So I'm always like, I don't know, but it's an interesting way to think about it. I have a young student the other day he's in 6th grade, and he was talking to me about a story, a time, and he was just matter-of-factly, coloring a picture and talking to me. And he said, I'm just still waiting for my mom to get back on her feet, right? So he's living with a different part of his family, and he also had 2 sets of grandparents died during COVID, so he's been moved quite a bit. And he said, I just remember this one time we were going fishing, and he said, I'm kind of lazy. I didn't want to walk all the way down to the river. It's a zigzag path. And so I stayed up here with my mom's boyfriend, and he had his head on a rock, and he was just laying there sleeping. But then I realized he wasn't just laying there sleeping, and he was sort of twitching, and I couldn't get him to wake up, and I didn't know what to do. He said, so I went down, and I got some water, and I splashed it on him, and I called for my mom, and she came up, and she helped me with that. And he said, now that I'm 11, I know he was overdosing, right? But we were able to help him, and it felt okay, and my mom came and helped me. But so he's telling me all this in a very matter-of-fact way. He was not escalated, it was not anything. But he had this lovely phrase that's resonated with me. He said, I just think about that zigzag path Mom took back up from the river and that I didn't want to go down. Maybe we're all just on that zigzag path together. It's like, okay, so this is a very wise 11-year-old person, right? Who is doing wonderfully well in school, has all these protective factors in an extended family, but also has that original trauma. It makes me curious about what his very early years are. I don't know, but again, so I want to say our wiring is going to be there. It is just what it is, and it can help us, right? It can help us in times of real danger. We think about this a lot, right? Those mirror neurons. This is something I think we think about a lot in schools, or I hope we do, and that how we show up in our face is going to be reflected, right, with the child, right? Mirror neurons are very important. It's how we are socialized, right, to understand and recognize how people are feeling. So you could either get this, or you could get this, right? So sometimes when I talk to kids and they're telling me, everything in my house is just really yelly. Everybody's really yelly, they always say. I'm like, oh, that might be what's going on. That might be why you see that as an immediate response, if that's all that's been modeled, and that's what they know, and that's what their brain has been wired to do, right? So it's not personal. It always feels personal, I know, but there it is. So this is important in adolescence. This is Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a developmental pediatrician and researcher that started the National Trauma Network Center for Children, right? So he's been doing this work a long time. I love this idea. The default is set at suspicion, not acceptance. If you have that wiring early in your life, right, that is a very different way to approach people. And it's definitely going to frame how you go through life, how you are received by others, and how you receive others. This idea also is a protective part of our biology, that anything new or novel was automatically assumed to be a threat, right? Because you didn't know if that creature that was approaching you was going to hug you or eat you. So you always had to default to, it might eat me, because that would be how we continue as a human race, right? So the brain's goal here, and I think this is important when we're working with adolescents especially, is always to get more information, right? To kind of ascertain, is this safe? Am I safe? Are you safe? And of course, they're going to closely monitor, all our nonverbal signs, right? That is what their brain has been attuned to do ever since they were little tiny tots. Like, check out what is going on with your tone of voice, your expression, your body language, how close do you get to them. All of that is being processed immediately and not on a conscious level. They're not going to be like, whoa, buddy, bubble, back up. It's just going to happen automatically. So here it is. what we're talking about then are these adverse childhood experiences. And we know, now that we know they are so predictable in how it turns out, then it is preventable, right? So if you have this early trauma and stress, you then have predictable patterns of the way your brain develops, right? And the way you have different behaviors and traits. We know how it shows up in school, right? We've seen an increase, right, in referrals into special education. We definitely have special education rooms where the teachers are telling me, these are all just behaviors. I don't know why they're in this room, right? I need a different level of support. I need a different way of looking at these children, and I need some systems to help me with that. So certainly attention problems, ADHD, ADD, aggressive behavior, social isolation, right? We've got kids, definitely I think I'm seeing through COVID, kids that can't quite remember how to read the social cues and play the social dance, right? So the screen was a very poor teacher for that or substitute for that, right? And then of course, if you're feeling sort of dysregulated, unhappy, jittery, hard to organize your thoughts, you're going to look for anything that can help you feel differently, right? And so that's where, of course, we default into using substances, right? Yeah, so whenever I hear of someone who has a substance use problem or is doing anything that looks like, wow, this is not going to get you what you want in a healthy way, it's just a coping tool. It's not a good coping tool, but that's how they're coping right now because that's what they have. So of course, we know what ends up there with suspension or expulsion. They just stop coming to school, they drop out, and then of course, we don't have good outcomes just as a community, right? This is a public health problem is what we're looking at. So science tells us that early adversity can change brain architecture. We know that brains develop from the most primitive to the most advanced. We know that brains have neuroplasticity, we can adapt. We know we are hardwired for connection with others. Brains view new or novel experiences as danger, and that we need a felt sense of safety, right? We need to know what we feel in our senses to recognize safety. And that has to come through trusted relationships, and that takes time. So if you look at this little slide, what kind of situations here might be a good match for, say, you had someone who had early adversity, but they're working hard, they're getting their way through high school, they're going to go out in the world, but these are their character traits, right? They're edgy, they are hypervigilant, kind of emotionally detached, but they're quick to get in there. What would they be good at? There's a hint on the slide. Yeah, yes. So obviously they could go into law enforcement. They could go into fire or medic or, got lots of ambulance drivers, I think, that experience this. There's a study recently that showed most ER nurses have ACE scores of 4 or higher, 76%. So, you go there. These are, we used to call these maladaptive skills. Now we can recognize these are adaptive. We just got to make sure we fit. So the ACEs study, you've all seen it before, from Dr. Anda and Dr. Folletti. It came out in 1988 with 17,000 participants. We've been doing this now for quite some time, and the research continues to be the same, in that they are powerful, interrelated, and more common than we would ever think. And I think COVID, if we take anything positive from COVID, it has shown a light on this, right? It's really brought out into the sunshine some of these difficulties and things that are changeable, right? We can do something about it. So adverse childhood experiences are common. This is from the original study. We don't use terms like battered mothers anymore. But back in the day, in 1998, this is what they found. Are there any surprises there? Or is that just like, oh yeah? Or I guess I'm surprised it's that low, anything? This is from the original 17,000 participants who are all white, middle class, because they all had Kaiser Permanente insurance down there in San Diego. What do you think? No surprises? So we know then that ACE score, right, 4 or more is what they talk about, kind of can be the tipping point, right, for where you might have more predictable challenges or risks. And if you go back over here, think about how often you would maybe think of a child that you might be working with or a student you might be working with right now. I mean, I would say for many of my children, I think that I see their scores are anywhere from 6 to 11. I would add some more to these, right? That they are living through some difficult times, right? So common, interrelated, and powerful, that we know they increase the risk of multiple health and social problems that we can do something about because we see it. We see where it is. And we know that when we have a population with high ACE scores, and think about the population you work with, the community you're in, you probably have lots of good understanding of that. We know then that we can have this intergenerational transmission of ACEs that we can do something about, right? This is preventable. So here's sort of our new reimagining of the old ACEs idea, because if you look at what's hanging down there by the roots under adverse community environments, these are things that are just kind of, I always think of it like, we drink water and we're in the water. They're just in the air we breathe, right? So poverty, discrimination, community disruption, lack of opportunity, economic mobility or social capital, poor housing quality and availability, violence or neighborhood violence. Anything else there that you would add with the population or the communities you work in?
Generational trauma?
Yeah, generational trauma, yeah. Absolutely. So I like this. I like the more complete view of ACEs because these are, again, it's bringing us back to the community, right? So many times we tend to think of it as like, well, that's that family's problem or that's what's going on there. When we add in the community environments and the difficulties there, that gives us a better lens, I think. So this is kind of the newer version, right, of how we look at the ACEs. So we have generational, as you pointed out, generational embodiment or historical trauma. We have social conditions, local contexts, right? What's going on in your community around, gangs or neighborhood violence or poverty or inadequate housing or homelessness or high rates of death due to COVID, loss of caregivers. All of these things now we can look at. Then you have those very specific 10 adverse childhood experiences. We know it can disrupt your neurodevelopment. You have social, emotional, and cognitive impairments that are all repairable, right? Healable, but they're there. You adopt those health risk behaviors because you're trying to deal with it. I don't want to think this way and feel this way. I'm going to do something. Disease, disability, social problems, and then the early death, right? So from conception to death. That's a lot, right? It's a lot that we're looking at. I would have to say every person I've ever worked with trauma has never sat down with me and thought, oh, good, you're going to heal me. We're just going to sit down. We're going to figure this out. But they are always willing to talk about it and think about how healing occurs, right? And healing occurs within the relationship and talking about it. So dose-response relationship, right? The more ACEs you have, the more likely you are at risk, right? This is not a screener that diagnoses you. So if you were to go back and do an ACE screener and go, oh my gosh, I've got 6, how am I even standing upright? That is not what this is. This is population health. But the more we understand those social determinants of health, right? The more information we get about that, then the more proactive we can be. These are some examples of ACE attributable problems, right? So you can see many of them, this is not just mental health, right? This is physical health. We think about our population here in Yakima County. We have a high rate of heart disease, high blood pressure, right? Diabetes. This is what we're looking at. A lot of these, in many, many ways, can be related back to your early experiences. What was your social environment like? What is our need right now? Okay, so we know right now 1 in 5 children have identifiable mental health disorders. I'm going to say this is data from right before COVID. I'm going to say it's higher now. And 80% do not receive services. We're changing that, right? We've got school-based therapists. We have clinicians in our schools. We have communities in schools. We're doing the work. We don't have enough clinicians, but we're doing it. Most common, you tell me if you see anything different there, but what I see are attention problems, right? What are typically called oppositional behaviors, but sort of like, I choose no to whatever you're suggesting I do right now, and anxiety and depression. We're seeing a huge increase in anxiety and depression, especially in our younger kids. We have suicidal ideation, definitely increasing in my younger kids. ER visits are up around this, right? Because parents, where do you turn? What do you do if you have a 4th grader saying he doesn't want to live anymore? Well, you take him to the ER. What can the ER do realistically right now? Not a lot, right? We need the services. So school counselor situation is improving in Yakima, but we still have schools that don't have nurses, right? And maybe just have a part-time counselor, So that's a problem. And we've also got the highest number of children living in poverty here. And right now, 85% of all our current healthcare expenditures are due to these chronic health problems that we know we can do something about. So, growing number in our state and region are impacted by poverty and just scarcity of resources, high exposure to ACEs. We've got a lot of children exposed to substance use, right, in utero, right? We have that going on. Adolescents reporting this increased anxiety and depression. We know depressive thoughts correlate to lower grades in middle and high school, right? And also that chronic absenteeism. It's really hard to feel motivated and get out of bed and go to school when you feel awful, right? And you don't even know why you feel awful. And I love that this idea that I wish I had just had an adult to talk to. 80% of teenagers want to talk to people. They are looking for somebody. And luckily you guys are there. So, course. So what we've got, these adaptations of toxic stress, right? When you're constantly being flooded with those stress hormones, it's going to impact your cognition. How many of you through the COVID times had to like take on different work roles? Or just were doing that whole like, well, you're going to pivot today, or we got to be flexible, we kept hearing, right? That is exhausting. We are not meant to do that. So I think we all had like community ADHD, right? I mean, I thought I had early Alzheimer's. I couldn't remember anything. So it's getting better. But absolutely, cognition, attention, and that's going to compound into behavior, right? If you don't feel safe, if you don't have any energy, mental or physical, you're not going to be creative and open and curious to learning, right? You're in a survival brain mode, right? You are in survival. Your body is, you are. So of course we see all the risks that happen. This is where we're all trying to step in and not have it be like that, right? So, obviously you've seen this before, I hope. But what we're thinking about is going from what's wrong with you, and that can be a private conversation. I had a doctor say to me the other day, you don't go in there and say, what happened to you? I was like, no, this is for me, right? This is for me to get curious, right? What happened to you? And honestly, I've never yet had someone not want to tell me their story, right? Stories are what it's all about. Get the story, right? So what we've got going on, we've got an increase in substance use, we've got an increase in parental mental health disorders, and very few resources for those early years, right? It's very hard to find infant mental health or to help with postnatal or prenatal depression or anxiety. What we have still, and this I think is going to be a hang-on from COVID, is definitely a decline in free play and physical activity. We just haven't quite got back there. I'm so happy sports are up and running and we're out and about again, but we're just not seeing the same, and that's what I'm hearing in all the classrooms too. Even kids, when there is recess, there isn't just the same sort of rambunctious loudness. Everything is just a little bit more muted. So I'm not sure what that is. Family trauma, the intergenerational trauma we talked about. This is changing. We've got some increase now, at least in mental health funding through our state and through federal money, so things are looking good there. But there's also times where we don't have the funding, right? Programs get stalled out. We continue to have a lot of academic pressure and testing. That's where I think we might have started off a little wobbly, not recognizing we needed to attune a different way in the beginning of the year. We still have a lot of screen time, right? How many of you have teenagers that sleep with their phones? The one earbud is in all day long. I have so many kids in clinic that are talking to me. I'm like, I can't tell if, I was like, I wonder if she's like, responding to internal stimuli. Is she like, having a psychotic episode? Oh, I see. Never mind, that's what you're doing, I got it. So just being aware of that, I don't force people to take it out. I'm like, okay. And definitely changes in family structure. We've had a lot of loss, right? So what we're talking about there, we've got those adaptations, right, that you have done to keep yourself alive, and you've gone into survival mode, and you're colliding with some of the expectations of school. So what do we have? We have early substance use. Are you guys, tell me if you're seeing more of this. Did you see more of this past year? Earlier, more difficult, sort of more entrenched, more embedded, right? I see more kids due to their behaviors, being referred into special education when I'm not sure that's the best setting, right? I need services to help. Bullying and poor social connections. I just saw like entire classrooms that were so mean to each other, just coming from that place of deep wounds or something. That I was like, why would you say that? I thought he was your friend. Why would you tease him about his mom, dying? I was like, oh my goodness. So school failure, school refusal. I got kids that didn't want to come back. They weren't really doing much online, but they didn't want to come back either, so they're kind of in a stuck pause place. And of course, suspensions and expulsions continue, right, in our preschools on up. But we know this is going to be preventable, right, because we can see it. We can understand what's happening and we can recognize it. So I do want to remind all of you guys that really doing this work is social justice work, right? Recognizing what is going on around early adversity or adversity and trauma in childhood is our social justice work, because we want those kids to access their education, right? We want them in there. So what do we do? How do we provide some sort of way to be part of the protective systems, right? What we need to do is we need to look at the individual's capabilities, which might include their temperament, right? If you can get any information from a family caregiver or something, tell me what they were like when they were little. You need that information, right? You can reference that. The child needs to have a feeling of attachment and a feeling of belonging, either to a person or the whole school if possible, right? But definitely at least one person. And then also, do they have another community where they feel belonging to, right? Whether it's a spiritual community, their athletic community, anything, right? That says, I'm recognized, I'm important, right? So positive. How do you change that narrative then that says, I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, it didn't matter what I needed, right? To switching it around, to letting them know that they're important and valuable. What do you guys do right now if you see a kid that you know? Do you guys get to single out children and build relationships, right? You tend to find them, right? Or they find you? Right. So what's one way that you show a child that you believe in them, think of them in any way? You hold them in your thoughts, even when they're not right there in front of you.
I just study their name.
Yes.
So every time I see
Perfect.
them, I say their name.
Absolutely. That's a huge one, right? Yeah. Yeah. Saying their name, finding out a little bit if there's something they're really way into, you know.
Yeah, because I do detention at our school.
Yes.
Security guard, I do detention. 2 nights a week, 2 days a week. So I just came back into security for another position.
Yes.
And I got assigned detention 2 days a week after school. I also coach football, but I was just sharing a little bit ago. All the detention kids come find me. Never met them. Now they just seek me out everywhere, all day, throughout the whole day. But I know all their names, and then we talk in detention. It's not you gotta study. We just have conversations in there. So that relationships
Perfect.
with that troubled group of kids is really good.
Oh, you are a gift to the community. Thank you. Yeah, it is fun, right? Getting to know kids, and when you don't go in with some sort of moral agenda, not everything is a teaching moment, right? If you're just gonna be there and be present with them, right? Let them know that they are valuable just in being themselves. Yeah.
Just to add on, I don't know how other people feel, but I would like to see schools separate security personnel as like punishment enforcers. So holding those roles where it's a negative, underlying negative interaction with the security personnel.
Yep.
On a campus, I think is important to really help develop those positive relationships and really understand why we're there in the first place. What is our overall goal, and if we can interact positively rather than being the enforcer, so to speak, I think that will help open up a whole new gamut of protective factors.
Absolutely. Is any school doing that right now? Do you know? Are there schools? Yeah, you are? Great. Yeah, so just definitely changing that role, right? So that you are not seen just as the enforcer or the disciplinary person. That can be huge, right? Because they will avoid you otherwise.
In my school, we've changed even the title campus security to student advocate.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, language counts, right? So student advocate would be a lot more likely to have someone want to sit down and meet with you, right? Yes, absolutely. So we do have something that's sort of the other side of ACEs, and they're called the benevolent childhood experiences. And if you take anything from this, you can sort of weave it into your conversations with children, right? You don't have to sit down with a screener and read off the questions, but you can kind of weave it in, right? There is a counter to this, right? So favorable childhood experiences may counteract long-term effects, right, of childhood adversity. So we know this can help, but sometimes we just don't know where to start. We don't know how to ask, and it can be awkward. So here are some of the questions, right? Just read through those, and if there's any of them that kind of stand out to you, like, oh, I wouldn't typically ask that question, or I wonder about that, or I would never get that from a kid unless I, specifically and explicitly asked it. Did you have opportunities to have a good time? That's going to open up all sorts of good stuff, right? And I really like the last one. Do you have a predictable home routine, regular meals and regular bedtime? That is super important, right? We just can't underestimate, disrupted sleep, what that looks like as far as stress and behaviors.
Do you have a time when you ask these questions? Because I'm thinking of a student who's in crisis or who's in that defiant state of mind where you're gonna get, I don't know anybody.
Yeah,
No.
Nope.
So is this done, when is this usually done?
Usually, I do this sort of more like when I'm first meeting someone, but I don't just go through the list. I kind of weave it into my conversational intake. If someone is in crisis or highly escalated, you don't want to ask them a lot of questions, right? That just doesn't get you anywhere. But sort of the most benign one would be, do you have a good friend at this school? Who can I get for you right now that could help you, right? Something like that. If you're just like, man, you're just going through a hard time right now. What's going to help you just this moment? Really looking for those peer mentors, anyone that can be supportive in the moment. But yeah, if someone is super in crisis and escalated, we don't pepper them with a bunch of questions, right? Yeah, just probably won't get you anything. But once they're calmed down, if you have a relationship with them, that would be a good time to ask, right? Maybe they'll say it's you. You're the person I want to turn to. That's why I'm being like this with you, right? Because I know you're safe. So, so some of the ones that stand out to me on that list is definitely that idea of first I really need to establish baseline health. Are you sleeping and eating okay? Like, what is going on in your house? I have a little 6th grader I've worked with all year that, oh man, he's just got, like, his file is like this big, right? He started middle school this year. He came back from COVID. He was lost during COVID, never went to any Zoom meetings, never attended school when it opened back up, was moved around from mom to dad to back to dad and stepmom. Can tell you all the officers' names in the valley and who I should talk to and who I shouldn't. I never asked for this information, but he's happy to volunteer it to me. So he's just gone through a lot. But as the years gone by, he's really just become so much more relaxed in his school community because they have responded in very loving ways to him. I mean, they've held him accountable. He did get it suspended a couple times in the beginning of the year. But since then, I mean, he says to me, he's like, I like this the first time I'm out of school where I like the principal. He likes me. He's like, his interpretation is this guy likes me, even though he's the guy that has suspended him a couple of times. So I think, recognizing that some of those questions, some of that information you can get from them so you understand that background information can really help you when you're sitting with them know how to respond, right? And what they might need in your school setting. I like it because it gives us a way of not feeling helpless or hopeless. We always think about, oh my gosh, all these things already happened to them. What can I do now, right? What am I supposed to do with all those things that happen? How am I going to resolve poverty in the valley? Exactly. We're not going to resolve it, but we can go one at a time, and we can definitely take little chunks out of it, right? So, I mean, very much be aware of your body language. If your role is to be the enforcer in a school, I don't know how you soften that. I'm assuming you wear badges and things, right? But if you can be a little bit aware about how you present yourself, right? And body spacing, right? You don't want to crowd people. And learn something about the student that sparks joy. They often have clues. We don't have to look too far, right? It stuck out to me that one student where they realized he always wore his dad's jacket, right? That was the one thing we knew that he was attached to. He would always wear the dad's jacket which had the dad's place of work on it. And that was something he was proud of, right? And it's just a very tiny little sliver of information, but it was something that helped. Listen more, talk less. I think we always are, if someone is distressed, we want them to calm down, right? And if they're upset, we want to soothe them somehow. Lots of times we're talking. It's not helpful, right? So learn to sit with a little bit of quiet, right? Discomfort. They usually can kind of wear themselves out, right? And then say, tell me more about that. And as they kind of unwind, you can hear that. Listen for that. And then definitely attuning. You don't have to solve everything, right? You don't have to say, well, I think what you should have done or what you'll do next time. Don't go there. Just acknowledge that it was hard. And you probably feel terrible right now, right? And then just say, that you don't know what else to do, but you're really glad you told me, and you're going to find someone that's going to help with this, right? So that, definitely just giving some reassurance. A lot of the kids I'm working with right now seem to be having a lot of panic attacks. You guys seeing that? And panic attacks can look like emotional explosions, right? And behavior. But it's a panic attack. And so later when I'm able to kind of talk to them and explain what that is and say, oh my gosh, it makes sense to me that your brain and body would do that in that situation. You know, they calm down. They're like, oh, I'm not crazy. This isn't always going to happen. Like, no, we can help with this, right? This is a panic-like attack. I can help you with this, or an anxiety attack, however you want to phrase it. But just giving that reassurance, that makes sense to me that happened for you like that, due to what you've told me your life was like, right? Trauma-informed school discipline, you guys all practice this or are aware of this one, right? This is that same idea that we check in, right? If you have this up and ready and you've already coached people when they're not upset and escalated to know that, you know, you tell me if you're in the red zone, we're not going to talk about it right now. You go home, you stay in the calming room, you sit with the school counselor, you're with your safe person, whatever you need. I'm not going to just come in and we're not going to try and process, right? You know how they always have to do those processing pages. I feel like we do those too soon after the event. The kid's not really like, I don't know why I did that. And they write what you expect them to say. I shouldn't have called Mrs. M that word, but I was mad. Next time, I'll use better words. You're like, oh, this is not getting us forward. So you can see if they're in the yellow, you can come back, right, in an hour. And this gives them some choice and voice, right? They have some control over that. That might be the only control they have right now. So you're saying, I want to help you. Let me know when you're ready. And then ready to talk would be green. Yeah, let's figure this out together. Anybody use this right now in their schools still? Anybody? Oh, time. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're moving along. Okay, so those benevolent childhood experiences that we just went through, that short list, which we can send to you, are those protective factors. Those help us identify those, right? As important as it is to identify what adversity they have, we've got to figure out what protective factors they had. They had to have something if they're standing there in front of you, right? Anyone watching season 4 of Stranger Things right now? Because all my children are, right? They're all identifying with Max, right? Because she says she's about to be killed by this gruesome curse person. And she's like, and everyone's like, no, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And she's like, no, people have been telling that to me my whole life. That has never happened. It's never been all right. I feel like that's why all the kids keep talking to me about Stranger Things. So we can do this. So think about right now, who did you have? I'm sure all along our journeys, we've had those beneficial people in our lives, right? That helped us experience, safety, connection, feeling needed and wanted. And that could have been someone in school, it could have been your grandma, it could have been the bus driver. It doesn't matter, right? Every one of us has this ability, right? And so often it's nice to think about that person in our lives because that gives us, right, that feeling. And I love this idea. We just all want to be on the same team, We are all working together, right? We're paddling together up that way. It is not helpful if we're sitting in adversity with parents or teachers or other staff. If the focus is really the child focus and we know what they have gone through and we know we want them, we're going to presume competency and keep expectations high. We can do this together. But it needs a team. We definitely need a team. So thank you so much for all you do for the children. We will send this on to you, and I'm going to send you the benevolent childhood experiences, right, and the resilience questionnaire. And if you can find some way to weave some of those questions into your daily interactions, it might prove helpful for you. Okay?
Thank you, Andy.